people ask me all the time, mostly people who attend our church, how involved I am in all the sort of creative pre-elements of the service. And I say I'm not really involved at all. Julie Arnold and I have worked together for about 17 years. And I walk in on Sunday mornings and just experience it for the first time with everybody else. I just totally trust her and our amazing video team and production team. And one of the reasons I don't feel like I have to be involved in that is because what I want to talk to you about for just a few minutes together in our session today, I want to talk to you about our template for Sunday morning service. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail with this, but I don't want you to get confused in the middle. My goal in our next few minutes together is not to convince you to copy what we do. That would be a mistake. And it's not to convince you to adopt our template, although you may want to. And probably our template for Sunday morning isn't all that different than what you do. But what we discovered a while back, and what we have to rediscover because we're like you, we get busy and we forget some of the fundamentals sometimes, is that the clearer we can make it to our team what we're trying to accomplish on Sunday morning, the easier it is for us to stay on track, the more creative we can actually be, and the less stressed out we are as a team when we meet together and discuss what it is we're trying to accomplish on Sunday. When I say template, I mean a pattern. This is kind of our canvas. This is our verse, chorus. This is just the way that we construct Sunday morning. And the truth is, at your church, you have a template as well. You may not know what it is. If I were to ask you to come up here and say, just give us your template, your framework for what you do on Sunday morning, you may struggle a little bit with the terminology, but you have a template. Most of us, when we went into church world, those of us who were senior pastors especially, we inherited a template, right? They said, you're the pastor of the church. You can do anything you want, except you need to know we always open the service this way, and then we always do this, and brother so-and-so does this, and so-and-so sings. You can do anything you want. Actually, we're going to give you a little slice of it. Because in church world, most of us inherited some sort of template. In other words, this is what happens on Sunday morning for that hour and 20 minutes or 15 minutes or hour and 5 minutes or 45 minutes, however long your service is. So I want to talk about our template. Now, the other thing this will help you with, if you're in a church and there's constant friction between the service programming division, or whatever you call it in your church, constant friction between the service programming division, the music people, and the senior pastor, if there's constant friction around stuff like, well, how much singing should we do? Or you may use the word worship. We'll talk about that in a minute. We need more worship, and there's kind of the need more worship. And the pastor's like, no, we need more time for the word, and there's this constant pressure to shorten your sermons, and you're going, but the Spirit's leading, and the people in preschool are going, yeah, but the Spirit's absent here completely, so, the Spirit can lead you all you want, but, we're just going to let the kids loose, okay, if you keep going. And there's just, that hit a nerve, yeah. So so in church world especially, and again, I'm going to focus on that hour service, or hour and 15, however long you do your service. During that critical point, if you have 2 or 3 services, it gets even more crazy. If there's tension, we need more time for preaching. No, we need more time for music. And then the administrator's like, okay, we need more time for announcements. I know everybody hates announcements, but people got to know what we're doing and why we're doing it and how to get involved. If you find yourself in this constant battle to the point where there's almost taking sides, maybe you've lost a staff member, my hunch is the reason there's constant, infighting around that is because you've never clarified the when for what you're doing on Sunday morning. And consequently, if you've never clarified the when, you've never established a template or a guide or a pattern or a map on Sunday morning to help you accomplish what you're going to do. One of the books that I highly recommend that we did a long time ago, Reggie Joyner and Lane Jones and myself, is the 7 practices of I always say it wrong. That's Stephen Covey. The 7 practices of effective ministry. Thank you. I think I know my own book. Anyway, 7 practices of effective ministry. And in this book, one of the things that we talk about is clarifying the when. And we've asked all of our ministries and all of our ministry teams to clarify the when, which means to describe in just a few sentences what is the bullseye on the target for that environment. In other words, what's the win at the end of Sunday or at the end of Sunday morning or Tuesday night or whatever your deal is, and you're driving home and you're like, yes, we did it. What is the yes, we did it? What's the win? Clarify the win. So if there's tension and there's all that kind of junk on Sunday morning, chances are, as a senior pastor, the when may be clear in your mind, but if the when is different in your worship leader's mind and in your education director's mind, then you can't ever really win because everybody's shooting at a different target. And if you've never clarified the when, then you can't have a template or a model or a pattern or a map that everybody's working off of. So what I want to do real quickly is talk about what's the when for us on Sunday morning. What's the template we use to get ourselves there? And in the process of this discussion, my real hope is I will challenge you to rethink your win. If you've never clarified one, maybe one of the best things you could do in your time together at Drive is to sit down with your team and say, okay, let's just put all the weapons away and ask the question, what's the win on Sunday morning? And then, as you're going to see throughout the rest of this day and tomorrow, then to begin to ask the question, what's the win in middle school? And once we've identified the win in middle school, what's the template, the pattern, the map we can use consistently to get us there Sunday after Sunday after Sunday? Because one of the hard things in ministry, you know this, is every once in a while you'll just have an incredible day. It's like, oh, it was perfect. The music's perfect. The message happened. People were saved. The offering. It's like, wow. And then you go 3 or 4 or 5, 6 weeks and you don't have one of those. And all of a sudden you have one of those, wow, it all came together. And in Christian world, especially if you're evangelical Christian world, the tendency is to go, wow, the Spirit really moved today. And I think God's going, well, no, you just happened to kind of all get on the same page for a change today. You could actually have that happen every Sunday. So, and now I don't know how the Spirit moves. Okay, and I know the Spirit does different things in different ways. But I think oftentimes it's a little bit too random. And I've worked in several churches. It could be a little too random. And what we discovered here, getting back to my point, what we discovered here is once we clarified the win, and our music people and our production people and the preaching people and the administrative people were all like, yeah, that's what we want to do. Then it was very easy for us to create a map to get us there. And there will always be, and I'm going to talk about this tomorrow afternoon in our closing session, there will always be some tension to manage. But we discovered that there are tensions we can manage that are not problems we should keep trying to solve. And if you're kind of locked in this death loop of trying to solve the problem of getting the preacher to preach shorter sermons, or solve the problem of trying to get people to do more music, or solve the problem of having enough time for announcements, if those are all problems you're trying to solve, then my hunch is you as a team have never come around, clarified the win, created a map or a template to get you to where you want to be. Now, here's how it works for us. We have a pretty simple mission: to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. We say that in some way, shape, or form just about every single Sunday in all of our services. Here's what we come together to do: lead people into a growing relationship with Christ. That's kind of our 30,000-foot mission statement. How do we do that? Because there's a lot of ways that you can do that. For us, we want to create churches that unchurched people love to attend. That's sort of our mission and our vision. We want to create a church, and now we're trying to create churches, and many of you are part of our strategic partner churches on this side of in our country and in different parts of the world. We want to create churches that unchurched people love to attend. That's our vision. That's what we want to do. So then we begin to ask the question, what role does some Sunday morning, and specifically the Sunday morning worship service, we're going to talk about how to apply this in all the other environments throughout the day and tomorrow, what role does the Sunday morning worship service play in creating a church that unchurched people love to attend to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ? So you kind of start with big, move down, move down, move down, move down. So here's what we discovered. Then we had to ask the question, so what's the win? Because this is the better way to ask the question. What's the win on Sunday morning as it relates to our worship service? What's the win? What's the thing that when it happens, our staff is like, yes, that was a slam dunk. I drive home going, oh my gosh, I want to do this the rest of my life. Everybody that's in production and music and administration, on Monday when we gather, on Tuesday when we gather to celebrate the success of the weekend, it's like everybody's like, that is what we were born to do. That is what we were called to do. What is the win? So for us, now you got to decide for yourselves. For us, the win on Sunday morning, the short-term win, there's kind of a short-term and long-term win. The short-term win on Sunday morning is when an unchurched person comes onto this campus and they find the context and the setting to be very appealing. They find and discover that the communication and the presentations are very engaging, and they discover that the content is helpful. And they leave, and they decide to come back the next week and bring a friend. That's the ultimate. That's like, oh my gosh, let's just don't do it anymore. That was as good as it could ever be. That when an unchurched person or previously churched person, an unbelieving person, shows up on Sunday morning to one of our services, and they, in their own way of seeing the world, go, wow, I felt comfortable there. Everything that was presented on paper, everything that was presented in music, everything that was presented in the spoken word was engaging. I felt myself engaged. I wasn't bored. I looked down. The time went by fast. And the content, I found that to be helpful. I don't know that I believe it all, I don't know that I'm going to do it all, but wow, I found that to be helpful. I think I'll come back next week. Oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. And if they come back next week and bring a friend, then we feel like we have done what we came here to do on Sunday morning. Now, I'm telling you what, if I don't say anything else and if I just stopped right there, simply clarifying the when in with that kind of specificity, I won't even try to say the word that word, that kind of clarity, thank you, that kind of clarity. Just that alone, now let me just track with me. That kind of clarity gets the music people, the preaching people, the announcement people, the production people, all on the same page. If everybody can just celebrate around that win, all of a sudden we see our roles with extraordinary clarity and we understand how the pieces fit together. Now here's the long-term win. The long-term win for Sunday morning is that people would attend here and they would begin to think differently and act differently. That their thinking and their behavior would be divinely impacted. That their thinking and their behavior would begin to lean toward God's will for their life. That they would attend Sunday after Sunday and they would say, you know what, my marriage is changing. My thinking about God is changing. There's peace in my life. I'm loving my one another's and I'm even loving my enemy. I'm beginning to love my mama. I'm beginning to, they would say, after coming here week after week after week, my life is changing. That's life change. The thing that we celebrate all the time here, and you do as well in your community and in your churches, is we love to celebrate life change. So that's the win. So when I get an email or when I hear a story about I came for the first time, I loved it, I'm coming back and I'm bringing a friend, throw up the confetti, we're celebrating. When we get an email or I hear a story of, you know what, my life is changing. I'm not the same person I used to be. That's celebration for us. So what's the win for us? The win for us is that a person who doesn't normally go to church shows up. The environment, they love the environment. They feel like, wow, you were talking to me and that was helpful content and I'm coming back. Celebration. Long term, I'm coming back week after week after week and my life is beginning to change. Now, for us, those are the wins for Sunday morning. So then we step back and ask the question, how then do we structure our time? And our worship services last about an hour and 5 minutes. We have nine services, 3 campuses here in the Atlanta area. How do we structure that hour and 5 minutes optimally so that a person who has never been here before or who is coming back to church after being away for a long time feels engaged and is somehow captivated by the information so much that they want to come back for the next week? And how do we structure that time so the returner comes back week after week after week and feels like I'm beginning to change, I'm beginning to understand, and I see God doing something in my life. So we decided to come up with a template so that and this is the key, so that when we evaluate in terms of everything that happens in that 5 minutes, we're all evaluating off the same tool. And this tool allows us to manage the constant tension between how much preaching, how much music, how much announcing, how long is the service, all those different components. How do we manage those things in such a way that at the end of the day, at the end of the weekend, we are all celebrating the same thing and we've been successful in what we feel like God has called us to do. Now, here's the challenge with all that, and whether you like our template or not, here's your challenge and our challenge when it comes to Sunday morning. If you're taking notes, we're on this session's on page 15 in your book if you want to take some notes, because I'm going to ask you to fill in some blanks in just a minute. Here's the tension. Whenever you think about 100 people, 200 people, 500 people, 5,000 people showing up in your ministry environments, you know as well as I do, if your audience, and in our case, our audience goes from skeptic to saint. Well, on Sunday morning, I just assume there are people being dragged in here against their will. They've been bribed with lunch. They've been bribed with, you'll meet somebody cute. They've been bribed with, if you want to live in my house, you're going to church on Sunday morning. They somehow got them in here. If you want to stay married, you better show up, So you got the skeptic to the saint who, when I say John 11, they say Lazarus. When I say Ephesians, they say, our position in Christ and the productive lifestyle of a Christian. When I say Ephesians 5, they say marriage. They just know it all, okay? They know it better than I do. Skeptic to saint. So here's the challenge. If our win is what I've said our win is, if our church is to help unchurched people, engage with Scripture and all that sort of stuff, then how do you take that broader range of people? How do you capture their interest, and how do you move them toward the point in the message or the point in the service you want to move them to? So again, they're engaged, captivated, want to come back, and at the same time, their thinking and their behavior has begun to change. How do you do that? And the answer is, and this is true of all communication, this is true of all events, all environments. You've got to find common ground. You've got to find common ground. The only way to move a variety of people with different backgrounds, different belief systems, different levels of spiritual maturity, the only way to begin to move them in a common direction is to find common ground. So as we begin to develop our template, we ask the question, what is the common ground on Sunday morning? I mean, you got singles showing up, it's the same as your church, children showing up, Christian people, non-Christian, want to be here, don't want to be here, sleepy, awake, love music, love church, hate church, had a bad week, had a great week. You got all this variety of people, and then all the subsets of Christians. They're all going to show up in your church, and we're trying to move them in direction so we can celebrate a win. You've got to find common ground. What is the common ground? Now, this is a very important question, and most church leaders don't ask this question because, again, just like me, you inherited a model. You inherited a template. And without ever thinking, we just show up on Sunday morning and just start the service and do what we've always done and just hope people can latch on. And because there's enough Christians in your community and enough Christians in your church, you're going to hear stories from time to time about good things happening. So you think, well, it must be working. But we ask the question, if you can think about this whole thing as a funnel, and we're at the broadest end of the funnel with the biggest variety of people, what is the common ground? How do we get everybody on the same page so we can begin moving them in a common direction? And we've decided, and this is just us, you can agree, disagree, do this for yourself or come up with something else. We decided that the common ground is emotion, not information. That the common ground is emotion, not information. That if I begin the Sunday morning service with information, and a lot of churches, especially traditional churches, begin Sunday morning with information. Don't we all agree? Let's all say this together. If you love Jesus, say amen. All that's all, that's a pretty narrow, narrow information, narrow emotion. We decided the best thing we can do is to try to get everybody on the same page emotionally as we begin to move them toward what we want to do on a Sunday morning. Now, the interesting thing is, if you have that thought in your mind and begin reading the Gospels, Jesus did this all the time. Now, this is just kind of effective communication, but Jesus did this all the time. I want to give you an example. It's a very familiar passage of Scripture. It's in your notes. I want to read this passage of Scripture through this grid, and then I want to give you some specifics as it relates to our template. This is the beginning of the discussion that ultimately led to the story of the prodigal son. Luke chapter 15, verse 1. Here's how it starts. You've taught this, you've read this, but listen to this. And listen as I read to who is in Jesus' audience. Talk about skeptic to saint. Talk about a diversity of people. Luke chapter 15, verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners, and there's a pretty diverse group, right? The tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. And now here's the other side. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, were there as well, all right? The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were there as well. So here's this diverse group. You got the tax gatherers and the sinners. That's the whole spectrum of the bad people. And you got the Pharisees. You got all the super religious people. They know the verse, no chapter and verse, the whole thing. There's Jesus' audience, okay? And it says the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them." They're not happy. Okay, we don't really want to be here. Our mom has made us come. That's that group, okay? We don't like the preacher. We don't like the music. It's too loud. We're just here trying to trap him into saying something, so we can tell on him later on. So here's Jesus' audience. And the issue of the day is, what is God like? Because what they're complaining about is Jesus spends time with all these sinning people. So now Jesus has got a point he wants to make. He wants to end the message and end the service and end the time together to make one clear point about God. He wants to change their thinking and ultimately their behavior, but specifically here, he wants to change their thinking, the sinners' thinking, the tax gatherers' thinking, the teachers of the law, the Pharisees. He wants to change their thinking about God, but he's got this very, very diverse group of people, some who already don't like him, some who are making up their mind, and all of them are confused about what God is like. So where does he begin? He doesn't even begin with God. Because as soon as he begins talking about God, he knows they're not going to be on the same page. Because the Pharisees and the teachers of the law think they've got it all figured out. And the tax gatherers and sinners are sure God doesn't like them. So look what Jesus does in this brilliant, brilliant way that I think gives us a template as we think about communication and as we think about structuring our time, whether it's with children or adults. Then Jesus told them this parable. And in this parable, Jesus skips over information and he begins with human emotion. He finds a human emotion that was common to everybody in the audience. He backed way up out of theology, way up out of style, way out of information, and he finds a human emotion that is common to everybody in the audience. And as Jesus begins talking, before long, everybody in his audience, the tax gatherers and the sinners, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, everybody in the audience is doing this. Yep, 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 yep. My goal as a communicator, our goal as a church, is within the first 5 or 6 minutes of our worship service to emotionally have everybody in the room going, yep, yep, yep. And you don't do that with information. You do that by tapping into a common emotion. Listen to how Jesus did it. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you, and one of you can be tax gatherer, sinner, Pharisee, Sadducee, teacher of the law. It doesn't matter. We're not even in those categories yet. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses, human emotion, loses one of them. And Jesus knew that everybody in the audience would have instantly the same sense of loss. This isn't a Christian, non-Christian, I love Jesus, I hate Jesus illustration. This is just broad, wide, human experience, and everybody in his audience would go, oh, that would be a loss. Then he goes on, loses one of them. Doesn't he, who's he? He isn't, I love Jesus, I hate Jesus, it's irrelevant. He isn't, I understand God or I don't understand God, it's irrelevant. Doesn't he or she leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And everybody in Jesus' audience says, yep, that's what we would do. And suddenly this very diverse group, in some cases this angry group, this group with an agenda, this group that doesn't want to be here, this group that's confused, this group that doesn't like that group, everybody in Jesus' audience is going, yep, that's what I would do. I would go out and look for that lost sheep. And now Jesus has found common ground, and the common ground found in the parable is emotion. We all know what it's like to lose something. We all know that sense of desperation when you want to find what's lost. And he goes on. And when he finds it, he joyfully, that's even an emotional word, isn't it? He joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home, which is what they would all do, because in that culture, that's what you would do, regardless if you were a sinner or not, an outcast, religiously or not, you would take it home. Takes it home, and then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice. There's that emotional word again. Rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. And at that point in Jesus' parable, everybody in the entire audience is going, yes, yes, yes. Now, this is what's so cool. Jesus, and we're not going to look at the rest of the parables, Jesus is about to make a profound and, for many of them, new point about what God is like. And they're not all going to agree. But at this point in the discussion, they're all shaking their head, and they're all moving with him in the same direction. We feel like at our churches, that's the template. That's the beginning. That's the broad end of the funnel. That's where in any kind of gathering with children, with middle schoolers, with high schoolers, with adults, that's where we need to begin. That the common ground, the easiest common ground to develop is the common ground of human emotion. Now, you experienced that last night. When you came in here last night, our goal was to make you smile. Our goal was for you to enjoy yourself. Our goal was to even put you a little bit off balance in terms of how things began so that you would be totally engaged. This service, I call it, this session, you notice we did absolutely no worship music. We did that on fun, just on purpose, just as Jeff said. We wanted you to have fun. You know what I knew? You know what you know? That we are more open to learning when we're emotionally engaged. And music is a way of doing that, but music is not the only way of doing that. At the end of the day, whether you use music or you use something else, I want to challenge you and encourage you as you evaluate what you do to think in terms of, in the first few minutes of anything that we do, how do we engage people emotionally, and how do we get them, and how do we tap into the common human emotion that is broader than theology, broader than felt need, broader than whatever point it is that we're trying to make in a specific time together. So anyway, with all that in mind, here's what we do in terms of a template. Here's some questions we asked, and I'm going to show you the template specifically. You may want to write these down. When we're planning, we ask the question as we look at the different parts of our service. This is a really important question. How will this make people feel? How will this make people feel? How will this make people feel? If we open this way, how will we make people feel? When we go into this section, how will people feel? How are people going to feel throughout the service? Now, before you kind of blow me off, my point today is not that our goal is to make people feel good. In fact, we're going to make the opposite point in just a minute, okay? But as you plan your production, as you plan a Sunday morning service, it's important to ask at this point, how are people going to feel? If we do this at the top, how are people going to feel? How are non-Christians going to feel? How are Christians going to feel? How are single moms going to feel? What? Because if you lose people emotionally in the first few minutes, they're probably not going to track with you through the rest of it. The other question we ask is, what do we want people to feel? What are we trying to get people to feel? And what are we trying to get people to feel at this point in the service? And then maybe the most important question of all, as you think about putting it all together, at what point is it appropriate to risk people feeling uncomfortable? Or the other way of saying it is, at what point in the service is it okay that people feel uncomfortable? You see, the gospel, you know this, the gospel is offensive. But I think it's a mistake to offend people with other stuff. I think it's okay to offend people with the gospel. It's okay to say, you know what, you are a sinner, and if that makes you uncomfortable, I'm so sorry. That's actually good news, because until you realize you're a sinner, you're not going to need a Savior. So if you don't come back next week because I made you feel like a sinner, that's fine. But I don't want to make them feel like a sinner in the parking lot. And I don't want to make them feel like a sinner in the hallway. I mean, you could have people doing track evangelism out in your parking lots, right? And hey, if you don't like it, sorry, leave. We need your parking spot. But none of you would do that. Why intuitively do we know you don't do personal evangelism in the parking lot? Because there's just something in you that goes, well, that's just too early, right? At some point in our gathering, it's okay to offend people. It's okay for people to feel emotionally uncomfortable. As Jesus finishes that series of parables, he makes a really uncomfortable point for some of those people, that God is like a father waiting for a prodigal son to come home. And when that son comes home, he's going to wrap his arms around him and say, you're back and there aren't any consequences. Oh, no, whoa, hold on. But see, nobody feels that until he's gotten through 3 parables and made the point over and over, and has everybody in his audience going, yeah, that's how I feel when something that I value is found. Yeah, that's how I feel when something of value is found. Yeah, that's how I feel when something of value is found. Well, guess how God feels when something of value is found? Well, that makes me uncomfortable, but I can relate because see how that works? I think that's the model. I think that's the paradigm. Okay, so here's how this actually looks. We're going to put there's a little chart in your notes, and you can fill in some of these blanks. We essentially, on a Sunday morning, and this is true of all of our environments, but we're talking specifically about Sunday morning, we want to do 3 things. I want you to fill in these 3 blanks here across the bottom first. We can go ahead and put those up. We want to, in the front end of our service, this is the beginning of our service, this is the broad end, this is the skeptic to saint, this is the I want to be here, I don't want to be here, I can't wait, I'm going to sit on the front row, this is it okay if I sit out in the hallway and watch the monitor, the broad end. 3 things we want to do. We want to engage up front, we want to involve in the middle, and we want to challenge at the end. We just think this is common communication strategy. We think this is essentially what Jesus did in every single parable. Engage. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and you loses one. I'm in. Involve. I want you to actually do something and participate with us. And then I want to challenge you. If you get these out of order, I think you violate the way we were created. This is how friendships go, right? You are most open to challenge in a friendship with the people that you've been engaged with the longest and that you've been involved with the longest. But when total strangers do this, you're only going to do that once, okay? You haven't earned the right to challenge me. We think every single Sunday morning we have to earn the right to challenge people because we assume every Sunday morning there are going to be people here who are far from God and who have never been here before. And when I offend them with the gospel, I want to have given them enough time to think, you know what? I think these people really like me. I think they really care about me. And yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that. But by the time they got to that point, honestly, I had laughed, I'd cried, I felt emotionally engaged, and I think I might even come back. In each of our Sunday morning worship service environments, there are potentially 8 segments, and I want to talk about these 8. We don't do all 8 of these every Sunday morning. Most of you, I recognize, do most of these 8 at some point on a Sunday morning, but I want to talk about how we position these strategically. 4 of these we do every single Sunday. Let's go ahead and put those up there if you want. 1, 3, 4, and 7 we do every single Sunday. Number 1 on the broad end of the funnel for us is the pre-service experience. The pre-service experience, you do this. The pre-service experience is the parking lot. I tell our parking people and our host teams all the time, the message or the sermon begins in the parking lot. The sermon begins in the parking lot. The experience begins in the parking lot. The worship service doesn't begin when we begin in here. The worship service begins in the parking lot. This is what's on the screen. This is iTunes playing as people come in. This is all the pre-service experience. The other thing that we do every week, like you, is we do some sort of welcome. Let me talk about that for a minute, because this is a big bone of contention in all churches, and we have this tension as well. This is not announcements. This is a welcome. Why do we do a welcome? Because we have guests in our home. When somebody comes to your front door, you don't open the door and start giving them information. You don't give them announcements. Welcome to my home in 5 minutes. No, what do? You welcome them, right? Now, you know what? Listen, do you know why you do announcements and don't welcome? Because you forgot there are guests in your home. Because that's the paradigm you adopted. And as we're going to say in a few minutes, talk about in a few minutes, the gravitational pull of the local church is always toward insiders. The gravitational pull of the local church is always toward insiders. People who don't attend here never call to complain. People who don't attend your church never call your church to complain, right? They never have a gripe. They don't even know we exist. So consequently, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The gravitational pull of the local church is always toward insiders. So this is how this helped us. And Julie Arnold was so strategic in helping us realize this. When we took out the word announcements and said welcome, then when we evaluate our services, guess what we ask? Did outsiders and first-timers feel welcomed? No, they just felt announced at. Well, nobody wants to be announced at. We want to be welcome. So in this slot in the service, which may be the very first thing people experience on a Sunday morning after they get in the building, in this slot of the service, the only things we, quote, announce are things that are related to next steps. Hey, if you'd like to take a next step, we have an environment called Next that meets right after this service. That's kind of a welcome and an announcement. Hey, if you've been coming for a while, you have questions about God, Jesus, and the Bible, and Andy never seems to answer your question, and you're thinking, I've just got to get this question answered. Hey, we've got an environment called Starting Point. The orientation is right after the service. So anything that goes here that is information-oriented is all about next steps, because we want people to feel welcome. You say, well, Andy, where do you do your announcements? That's what bulletins are for. And in our pre-service experience, as some of you have been here, we have a thing called 10 before. That while people are coming in, we just load up the announcements in the 10 before, which is video driven. You say, well, not everybody's there for it. You're right. A lot of people are going to miss that. But when we decided what is the win on Sunday morning, guess what never came up in that discussion? The win is that everyone would know everything we're doing all week long at the church. That's the win. Never even came up. It didn't even register the conversation. Why? Is information important? Yeah. Are announcements important? Yeah. But when you compare information and announcements next to your win on Sunday morning, it begins to decrease in terms of its importance. So consequently, we shoved it to the beginning, we print it, and we're very careful to protect this. This is a welcome. The other thing we do is singing. We do not use the word worship here. Here's why. When an unchurched person hears the word worship, what do they think? Answer, you have no idea. Worship, and I'm all for worship, obviously, and I'm all for singing. We're going to sing. We've decided in our discussion, let's just call it what it is. We're going to sing. And when our, quote, worship leaders or song leaders get up and say, hey, let's stand, and we don't say worship. All the insiders know what you mean, but all the outsiders are like, do I need incense? Do I bow? Whoa, we're going to do what? Oh, they're not worshiping, they're just singing. Well, so let's just call it singing, all right? So we sing every week, pre-service, welcome, singing, and then there's a message and the title package right here. So these are the 4 experiences. Now, as you can see, in terms of emotion, think emotion. We want this to feel great. We're not doing evangelism out in the parking lot. I want this to feel great. We want this to be broad. We want people, you know what we want them to feel here? Not informed, not here's what we believe, not repeat after me. We want them to feel welcome. And when it comes to the singing, you know what we tell our music leaders and our worship leaders? We call them worship leaders still. You know what we tell them? We say, look, when you're putting a list of songs together, I want you to put a list of songs together that has this in mind. If you have a song list and one of them's about Jesus dying on the cross and the blood's pouring out everywhere and he's given his life for you, okay? And then you got a song about how all of creation just declares the wonders and the glories of God. Guess which song we want you to do first? We want you to start as broad as you can with the topic, and we want you to find the common emotion. Most people believe in God, I'm good with that. Most people believe in creation, good with that. Even in your song selection and the order of the songs. Now, all you music people, we have the same debate. The music guys go, yeah, but see, the song about the blood flowing out and everything's in the key of C, and if we start with the key of C, it's much easier to transition. That's kind of an up song. I go, and here's what I say. You know what? Transit keys, important. Up versus down's important. Transition singers, important. All that's important. Moving people emotionally is also important. In our world, this trumps that every single time. I want you to be sensitive to, and I want you to fight for things being excellent in terms of music. But in terms of paying attention to this template, this wins the day every time. So we have that discussion. Well, key change, I'm like, good, important. But when you do song selection, there are songs that we do not do on Sunday morning that we would do during we'll do a Sunday night or a Thursday night worship time of worship. We have an hour and a half of just music. We'll do all kinds of songs. There are songs we never do here, and here's why. Because at this point in moving people, they're not ready to declare certain things if they're not Christians and if they haven't been here for a long time. And that doesn't mean we skip topics. It just means we're sensitive to the emotional flow. And then the message. Now, the other thing that we do that you do as well is baptism, which is number 5. Let's put that one up there. And in our baptism services, you've been here, some of you, for this. Everybody that's going to be baptized has to tell their story. If you won't tell your story on video, we don't baptize you. You can go get baptized in a pool, go to another church. We have some events where there's some baptisms. But in our world, you have to tell a 2 or 3 minute story. We show your story up on the screen, and then we baptize you. It is extraordinarily emotional. I mean, it is like we let people do 16, 17 takes. They can do as many takes as they want. We show them a bloopers video to kind of get them relaxed, okay? We say, this is your moment to tell your story to more people in 2 or 3 minutes than you'll get to tell for the rest of your life. So consequently, we want it to be great. So we put baptism right here. So look at the flow. Broad, everybody's there. Everybody feels welcome. We're beginning to move in a theological direction, but we're going to move there gently. And now we want you to hear. We want you to experience and see what God has done in the lives of some people. We're not asking you to believe anything. We're not asking you to do anything yet. We just want you to be involved emotionally with these people's stories because you can't really argue with a story. Now, the other 3 parts that are interchangeable, let's go ahead and put 2, 6, and 8 up all at the same time, are these 2. This is an opener, a special, and a closer. Let me talk about these, especially for all the music people. Once we clarified this helped us so much in our song selection. In an opener can be minute to win it, like we did Sunday if you were here. An opener could be a song. An opener could be a sketch. An opener can be a video. But here's what an opener must do for us. An opener must make people happy they're here. An opener must make people go, I like this. Oh, they did a Beatles song. If we're doing a big, heavy relationship series, then let's do a Beatles song. If we're doing a big marriage thing, then let's do a love song. This isn't about content. This is all about feeling. If people can laugh in the first 5 or 6 minutes that they're in church, I'm telling you, that's a win. There are people that come to your church There are people that come to our church, they haven't laughed in days. They haven't smiled in weeks. There's nothing happy in their life. They're here because they're looking for, they're looking for answers. And if people can feel a sense of enjoyment, and here's the thing about this opener. Again, red, yellow, black, and white. I love Jesus. I don't know Jesus. I want to be at church. I don't want to be at church. Anything that's broad enough for people to feel something positive, we think is a win in that slot. So when you're choosing songs or when we're choosing songs, oftentimes this is a secular tune. I want this to be a song everybody knows. As soon as they hear the music, they go, I know that one. Their kids look at them and go, oh, Dad, I have this one. What you say, what's the spiritual value? It's the same spiritual value as when Jesus said, suppose that a man had 100 sheep and he lost one. Well, hey, Jesus, you got to the end of that whole parable. You never even mentioned God. Exactly. That's what we're doing right here. That's all this is. This is everybody going, I know that one. Oh, that was funny. I saw that show. That's all we want. Is there value in that? Absolutely, there's value in that. If you have kids, you understand. When you're approaching something sensitive with your kids, you try to find common ground. Then the special. This is usually a song. Sometimes a testimony might be an interview, but usually a song. Now, this is critical for all of you who are in service planning. This is so important. The music or whatever comes right before the message, the goal here, and we don't do this very often because this is hard to get right. The goal here is to create the tension that the message is going to address. The goal here is to create the tension that the message is going to address. Now, this is important for all of you who choose songs. I don't want a song that resolves tension. I want a song that creates tension. I want a song that when it's done, everybody's going, yeah. Wow. I want you to tap into human emotion. It can be negative human emotion. It can be sorrow. It can be pain. It can be a question. It can be unresolved. Just make everybody in this audience go, yeah, I felt that. Or yeah, what do you do about that? Or yeah, every time I hear that song, that's what I think too. Or yeah, I wonder where God is now. But it needs to be emotional. It doesn't need to resolve the tension. It needs to build tension. So this is really, really tricky to do for us. Oftentimes, again, if we're in the middle of a series, people already know what I'm going to talk about. It's a little bit easier there. But this is all about creating tension. Now, if you take one of these and put it right there, you've messed up. I've seen that so many times. Yeah, we're doing this series on the love of God, and so we have this awesome song about God's love, and God loves everybody, and it sort of is the whole sermon. So we're going to put it up front. I'm going, well, you didn't create any tension, and you gave them content they don't even know what the whole thing's about yet. No, make them feel great, make them feel welcome, get them engaged, make them go, wow, that's amazing. I've kind of sort of like my story, and then make them go, yeah, I hope somebody can answer that for me. And then the message. Now, for all you preachers and communicators, this whole wedge, every time I preach, my message is designed around another wedge. Because when I begin a message, guess where I begin? I begin right back here. Everybody. Everybody. And in the first few minutes of every message I preach, I want everybody to feel something and to be going, yeah, I've asked that question. Yeah, I wondered about that too. Yeah, that happened to me. Yeah, I'm glad somebody's finally talking about that. We go right back out to the open end of the funnel and begin to move people just like Jesus did in their communication. Then the closer. We don't do many closers. We usually do a closer at the end of a series, not at the end of every sermon. In fact, around here, we almost treat a message series like a sermon. The first part of a sermon series, sometimes the introduction will have almost no scripture at all because we're introducing a topic, we're introducing attention. And at the end of a sermon series is oftentimes when we're calling for commitment. Whatever the closer is, and for us it's usually a song, whatever the closer is, it needs to, here's my phrase, punctuate the point of the message or punctuate the point of the entire series. Punctuate the point of the series, but it does not need to introduce new ideas. It does not need to introduce a new topic, and it doesn't need to introduce a different tension. If it doesn't punctuate the point, for us, just like you do this, sometimes it's a worship song or where everybody stands up and sings a song they know because declaring those lyrics punctuates the point of the message. Sometimes it's a big ballad. You do this stuff all the time. But in terms of choosing that song, it has to punctuate it. Now, This kind of clarification, when we sit down to evaluate and when we sit down to plan, is extraordinarily helpful. It's helpful for our service programming people. It's helpful for me as a communicator. It's helpful for the people that are choosing songs. It's helpful for our guest speakers. It's helpful for everybody. Because when this is filled in on a particular Sunday or for a particular series, everybody knows where we're going. The worship leaders told, hey, we're only going to do 2 songs Sunday. Why? Well, because we have 3 baptisms. Oh, no problem. And so I don't feel like you're trying to get rid of music altogether. No, we have an hour and 5 minutes. We got one of these. So therefore it's going to impact this. And we have one of these. So consequently, that's going to shorten your time. But worship leaders and music people go, wow, what you're asking me to do is strategic. And when they bring songs to your meeting, they know where the songs fit. And when Julie comes to me and says, Andy, Sunday, you only get 30 minutes. Now, Julie Arnold does all of our service programming division for all 3 campuses. Again, as I said a while ago, we've been working together for a long time. When Julie comes to me and says, Andy, here's what Sunday looks like, you only have 30 minutes. I don't feel like she's trying to hamper the work of the Spirit and the church. You know what I realized she's done? She said, Andy, we've looked at the whole thing. And in light of what we're doing Sunday, because I'm telling you, these ran a little long, but they're awesome. And Andy, you wanted us to punctuate the message with the closer. And once we put all the pieces in, it's kind of cramping a little bit of your time. And I say to Julie, I'll do that. I'll do my best to do that. Because I realize there's a context for that decision. This template for us has taken away so much tension, and it has allowed us to be far more creative, not less creative. Now, in your notes, I want to fill in a few blanks, and then we'll get you out of here and get you off to some breakouts. In your notes, letter A, rules to the exception to the rules. Is that where we are? Is that it? All right, rules to the exceptions to the rules. Because there are exceptions to all rules. Letter A. These are our rules. Again, this is our template and our rules. It is okay to depart from the template on purpose. It is not okay to drift from the template by accident. It is okay to depart from the template on purpose. It is not okay to drift from the template by accident. Here's what I mean by that. Every once in a while, there's a special Sunday where this doesn't work. And if our service production team says, you know what, in light of what we're doing next Sunday, we've got to depart from this, and everybody in the service production team meeting is going, yeah, it's not going to work, that's fine. It's okay to decide not to do this on a given Sunday. It is not okay to drift from this over time. That's our rule. Letter B. It is not okay to depart from the template because, for all you creative types, hang in here with me. As you can tell, we're full of creative people in this organization. It is not okay to depart from the template because, number one, we're bored. Number two, we want to do something cool. Number three, we just want to change things up a bit. We don't do it. Here's the thing. We may get bored with this, but so what? God hasn't called us to be always interested, God has called us to be effective. And the thing is, if you do this well, you won't get bored. But every once in a while in your service programming meetings, has ever happened, people go, I just feel like we're doing the same thing all the time. See, that's a completely different issue. So we don't change this because we're getting bored or we're trying to do something. Let's just do something cool Sunday. Hey, if you can leverage cool for something effective, fine, but cool's never the goal, and we want to change things up a bit. Letter C. When we move outside the template, there needs to be a good reason. It needs to be a good reason. And as I said in my notes, we need to explain why, and the whole team needs to understand why. Here's some times that we depart from our template. We do a thing every year called Strategic Service Sunday, where the whole Sunday is dedicated to recruiting volunteers. So on the Sunday that we do a whole Sunday dedicated to recruiting volunteers, we don't think about this. We ask a different question. What's the best way to spend an hour and 5 minutes to recruit as many volunteers as possible? And we design the entire service around that question. And we're sensitive to the fact that we have to move people, but we don't play to these 8 categories because on that particular Sunday, it's a whole different thing. A few years ago, we did a whole Sunday dedicated to the issue of pornography. And as we looked at the content of the message and what we were doing, the whole idea of standing up and singing worship songs right before that topic felt creepy to us because everybody was coming to church that day. They knew we were going to talk about pornography. And as we looked at the whole service, it just felt, that's just going to be weird. So we abandoned this because of the nature of what we're going to talk about. So there are times to abandon this. But my point to you is once you come up with your template, you may not like our template. Once you come up with a template, you got to have a template. because you got to have a win. And once you know what the win is, you got to figure out the best way to get there. Once you've established it, you can be flexible. But the point is, be flexible on purpose, not by accident. Now, Roman numeral 4 real quick. The creativity quandary. Because when we first began talking about this and presenting this, I could see the artists in our group, and we have lots of artists, and I love the fact that we have so many artists. You could see the artists kind of feeling like, oh, you're putting me in a box, you're putting me in a box, you're putting me in a box. So let me address that specifically. Creativity, letter A, always has constraints. Creativity always has constraints. I don't care what kind of creative mode you're in and what your art form is. Creativity always has constraints. Here's the list of constraints. If you're a painter, you're going to pick a canvas, and once you chose the size of that canvas, you are constrained to the size of that canvas. You cannot paint 2 or 3 feet off the canvas, okay? Once you pick, it could be a huge canvas, but once you pick a canvas, you have chosen a constraint. That's the nature of creativity. Audience attention span. If you want to have 4.5-hour services, you can do that. You can be very, very creative. But you know what? The audience attention span reduces the amount of time you can have, which again reduces the amount of creativity. There's just some built-in factors. With movies, there's always the editor's cut, and then there's the one they put in the theater. The editor, the person that created the movie, they're the artist. They're going, no, I need 4.5 hours to tell the story of Kingdom of Heaven, or 3.5 hours. I got to have 3.5 hours. Or Alexander. And the people who are going to market it say, yeah, but people aren't going to sit through a 3.5-hour movie. So for the sake of we want people to see the movie and creative license, we're going with we want people to see the movie. Because all creativity has limitations. Cultural limitations. Isn't it interesting that regardless of what kind of music you listen to, other than classical music, whatever, if you think about the most culturally relevant music, pop music, hip hop, or country music, that essentially, if we were to all write down on a card, here's my favorite song, predictably, most of your songs would begin with a verse, have a chorus, have a verse, have a chorus, have a bridge, chorus out. Or verse, chorus, lead, chorus out. Or verse, chorus, over. There's about 3 or 4 patterns of contemporary music that work. And there's all kinds of creativity within that canvas. There's all kinds of creativity within that spectrum. But essentially, culture determines what is palatable, what's acceptable in terms of creativity. So this is not an effort to squash creativity. What we've learned is this. Once everybody knows how big their canvas is to begin with, then it's much easier on that canvas to be more creative. Our goal, letter B, is not to be creative. It's to leverage creativity for the sake of our mission and our vision. Now, again, this has helped us so much at every level of the organization. Everybody knows where they play. Everybody knows what we're doing. So I want to end by giving you 3 questions as you think about your church, as you think about your worship service, or as you think about the environments that you've been hired to create. Number 1, what's the win for you? And what's the win for that environment? You can't answer that sitting here, but it's a question you've got to answer. What's the win? What's the bullseye on the target? Secondly, do you have a template that serves that win? Do you have a template? Now, there is one that exists in your church. There is one that exists in your student ministry. There is a template. If I were to come to your children's ministry for 6 weeks, I would understand how you do it, or middle school or high school or worship service. But have you identified it to the point that you can talk about it so that you can get everybody on the same page? And then number 3, does everybody on your production team know what you're trying to do and where they fit in? Does everybody in your production team or in production world of your church, do they know what you're trying to do? And do they know where they fit in? On a given Sunday morning, all kinds of people show up to our churches with all kinds of expectations and all kinds of hurts and all kinds of needs. And it's so amazing, we have the stewardship of their time. We have the stewardship of, in some cases, their talent. We have the stewardship of their interest. And we need to do a great job. And if we're going to continue to reach this next generation of people, students, children, teenagers, whoever it might be, we must identify what's the win for them in light of what God's called us to do. And then as we put together teams, we've got to clarify the win so that we're working on the same page, so that on the Monday morning after the weekend, we're able to sit down and evaluate in such a way as to make it better next time.